For part two of modern art from 1930 to 1950-ish, um, we're going to look at Frida and Diego Rivera. Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera are kind of this like Mexican artist power couple. They kind of united under a philosophical similarity on what art should cover and looking at a merging of modernity in Mexico and politics with folk art. And so they kind of are interested in trying to kind of find a pre-colonial identity in a modern world, which is a very kind of cool combination. However, they had a very tumultuous marriage, and so it's quite dramatic in many ways. And they were married, and then they were not married, and when they were married, he had an affair with her sister. So there's a famous movie about it. But generally, they philosophically and politically and artistically agreed a lot and supported each other in many ways. Originally, Diego Rivera was the more famous of the two in the couple. She started dating him when she was an art student and younger, and he was more famous. But she actually kind of, sort of like Georgia O'Keeffe, becomes more famous and influential than her spouse. So that is the story. They also raised international attention to traditional and modern art in Mexico, which was really important because largely Mexico was being overshadowed, but had a very rich and unique art scene. And Rivera founded the Mexican Muralist movement, which a lot of actually artists from the United States actually copied and whatnot. And he was commissioned by Americans often to come and do it. So you can actually see some of Diego Rivera's murals in the United States in various places. This is an example of one of his murals, and it's at the National Palace in Mexico City. It was painted from 1929 to 1935. It has the history of Mexico, and so you can see that there's these kind of references to actually figures and images that we visited in Mayan art. So you can look at the stylistic layering that is happening here, as well as kind of the geometric patterns that are very kind of strong in Mayan and Aztec art, and the way that he storytells is very similar to where there's kind of things are happening over on top of each other. So this is kind of a monumental piece and fresco, and this garnered a lot of attention. The one that's on the exam is this Sunday afternoon in Alameda Central Park. It's from 1947, and it has the theme of Mexican history and a crowded and dynamic composition with lots of little portraits and historical figures and symbolic elements. So he's kind of bringing across time or across space throughout the mural. And he represents himself as the quintessential subject. So he is in the mural as well as Frida Kahlo, who holds her hand with a yin yang symbol, so that she is supposed to be kind of his opposite, his balance. And it's supposed to also bring in the yin yang is actually when we say it yin yang, we're talking about kind of an Asian kind of balance, but actually he's using the symbol from Aztec duality. So he's actually kind of pulling the same concept, but from Aztec art. It has his childhood experiences and historical stuff that happened in this park, including things from the Inquisition. And so there's just a lot of different kind of layers happening of modern and past happening in his painting. He primarily used large scale. And because he felt like it was public, it was accessible, people could look at this and understand it and go walk by it. He was a socialist, and he very much thought that art in a smaller scale inside museums was for the elite. And so he wanted to kind of create a large body canvas that the public could consume. And that is one of the ways that he and Frida Kahlo united, is that they were both socialists and actually also even communists. So they socialized with Trotsky and Lenin. Okay, and then here is a painting that was done at in Detroit. And so here we have, it's a 27 panel work about kind of industry. And it's sort of a kind of a love affair with Detroit industry. It's hard to kind of see here, but you kind of have elements of industrial factories and people working in the factories and going to the factories. And remember that during this time, this is when Detroit was in its heyday. So it's in a celebration of productivity of the worker and everything that they can do, and the power of labor under this new industry. Opposition, Frida Kahlo's work was actually not often kind of in the public sphere, and that had to do with her health. So Frida Kahlo was kind of growing up she was actually in sort of I think her parents, her dad was like a professor. So she was sort of in this kind of upper middle class situation and living pretty good. Her father was a German descendant and photographer. And his mother was half Armenian and half Spanish. And, she had, older sisters and whatnot, and she lived in Mexico City. She was in a accident, a pretty bad bus accident where a portion of metal went into her back. So she was actually had to spend a good amount of time in bed in recovery, and that's when she picked up painting. And that's actually a story that a lot of artists tell. So she had poor health when she was little, and then she had polio when she was little as well. So she pretty much most of her life, she had kind of spent time in recovery in bed, and that's where she picked up her painting. So between the polio and the accident, she had to kind of carry a cane often, and she struggled with her spine and her body for the rest of her life, which becomes the big focus of a lot of her work. So on the left, you have the broken column, and so it's like looking at the inside of her body and her identity as a woman, and in a surrealist space back here that really pulls your eye just to focus on Frida and to see kind of the pain and the discomfort she felt with the braces that she had to have and all the kind of the different surgeries that she had to have. This is the two Fridas, so it's linking kind of colonial Frida and pre-colonial Frida together, and kind of this Mexican identity where you're pulling from the various parts of culture and politics and the history together. So she's a very kind of intellectually breaking apart the complexity of being part of a colonized people. This is a self-portrait along the borderline between Mexico and the United States. She went up when Diego was doing the mural in Detroit and was very unhappy. She did not like the United States. She felt very foreign there, and she had to dress up, and she had to kind of she felt like she was looked at and treated sort of like as an object when she was in the United States, and she was overwhelmed by kind of just the general demeanor of people. So she basically felt like she needed to get back to the U.S. To Mexico after that experience. So this is kind of her bridging the two places from that visit. In the end, Frida Kahlo kind of becomes more famous and produces more works of art. One thing to realize that a lot of people kind of hyper focus on her choice to kind of keep her eyebrows the way God made them. And I would be careful with that. The sort of kind of over fetishization of Frida's facial kind of aesthetic is actually problematic. So make sure that you're kind of, when you're thinking of Frida, you're looking at her as celebrating her natural self and her and who she is, which is pretty wonderful. During this time, there's abstract sculpture. So this is from 1960, but Barbara Hepworth became famous before then. I wanted to bring attention just because these are ones from your summer reading that you've seen. And here's Brancusi, Bird in Space. Simplicity is not objective in art, but one achieves simplicity despite oneself by entering into the real sense of things. So he's just looking at the element, the sense of the bird going into the sky. And this is Henry Moore, reclining figure. So you can see that there's a figure kind of here, but Henry Moore kind of uses the natural elements of this elm wood to make it happen. In opposition, you have the Soviet realistic art that we were talking about before with Paris Exposition, and this is in 1937, The Worker and the Collective Farm Worker. You have Calder starts his various kind of sculptures, hanging sculptures. This is painted sheet aluminum steel wire. It's a lobster trap and a fishtail, and these are kind of, you can actually go into a room in the National Gallery where they have like dozens of them, and it's quite beautiful to watch them move in space. It's about experiencing the art, and every moment that you see it, the shadows and the art all shift. This is the monument to the Third International. This was supposed to be a communist kind of celebration. This is the model, and it was lost, but it was supposed to be the celebration of modernity and industry. We go into architecture. You have the Schroeder House in the Netherlands, which kind of creates, if you look at the kind of houses near it, this is 1924, so we're moving out of the kind of Victorian style, which you actually see all over DC, and then there's a kind of decision to make the outside come in with larger windows and making more practical interior space, less halls, more open space for people to live in. So that sort of starts in the 1920s. This is also helped by Bauhaus, which was one of the major producers of modern art during the 20s. It was in Germany. It was later banned, but this is kind of, they came up with the open work area, so people not being in offices but being open spaces so they could learn from each other, because they were all architects and artists, and so they would have this kind of open space on the interior that they could lean on each other's ideas and learn. You also have Le Corbusier, the Villa Savoy in France. They moved kind of all the living spaces upstairs so you could have views. And so maybe the kind of family rooms and the kitchens and stuff would all be upstairs, and so you could see more. And this was kind of a shift from before. It also has very open spaces, but it's supposed to bring the natural in. You have the Chrysler Building being built, which is this very kind of Art Deco style top, and the kind of moving up to sky rises happens during this period. And finally, you have Frank Lloyd Wright, who decides to kind of create the modern American domestic space. He likes to look at the surrounding scenery and work within it. So you have, this is the Roby House in 1907, which kind of, he famously makes everything, he makes everything go more horizontal than vertical. And he tries to think about the way people live inside of a space. So if you look at a Frank Lloyd Wright plan, he's putting bedrooms kind of in off of kind of family living areas. He's rethinking kind of how Americans live instead of this kind of very up down. He's trying to kind of make it more of a flowing free space. The ultimate Frank Lloyd Wright work is this the Kaufman House, which is also called Falling Water. You can, and I can't do it right now, but you can go on the website, and there's actually a 3D kind of video that someone has done of how you built it. But he basically built this house into a waterfall and used the nature scenes around it. This is near DC. It's in Pennsylvania. It's actually kind of near Deep Creek, Maryland. It's not too far away. But basically, he's built the entire house to kind of take advantage of the views, but also have the waterfall continuing to be part of it. So it's considered to be quite a masterpiece of architecture for its time, and it's kind of cool. It pretty quickly became a restored site. So when the family that it had been built for sold it in the 60s, it still has all the like original architecture. I mean, it's in the original furniture, which is all supposed to not obstruct views, and it's all kind of very modern, mid-century modern. He actually is pretty much can be credited with kind of creating this mid-century modern look in it, and so it basically, everything inside and outside is to kind of help with the view. It's definitely worth a visit.